Capitalizing on Culture, Engaging Young Learners in Diverse Classrooms, from the book Equity and Diversity. I'm going to start us out where I am also going to end us in this presentation. And I'm going to give you the statement that I want you to use as a framework for this chapter. I think that this will help provide you with some guidance and perhaps something just to reflect on as you read through it. When each child's cultural capital is understood, learning can be enhanced by instruction that honors these cultural practices and respectfully teaches new practices rooted in other cultures. And I really want you to begin with that so that you can set that as your framework and intention for this chapter and reading. We know that diversity remains as the heartbeat of the U.S. and is really truly the way of our life. And as we continue to become more diverse, there's unprecedented demographic transformation happening. And the way you perceive that, the way you look at that, will really develop your practices. It'll help you expand your thought process behind diversity. The book has a statistic from 2014 that Latina children accounted for 25% of the U.S. public elementary and secondary students. This is just one population, right? This is just one. And we know that all of our demographics are becoming greater. And how are you as an educator ready to be prepared to educate children from all cultures? Ethnic, racial, and cultural diversity is a staple of our nation's school and its strength. And it is a strength that as we try to live up to our core democratic ideas, we need to continue deeper reflection and learning. As diversity increases in our nation's school, the prevalence of student punishment and discipline in an area that concerns many. I want you to stop and think about that. I want to think about your upbringing. I also want you to reflect on you as a teacher or future educator, and how have you seen that change? Have you seen that change? When you think about who maybe got into more trouble, supposedly trouble, quote unquote, at school, who was that? Was there more prevalence in punishment and discipline in certain populations? So I want you to take time right now to stop and think about it and pause this presentation and then come back to it. All right. Some things I want you to think about is that disproportionate expulsions and suspensions of African American and Latina children in particular, along with their placement in special education classes, remain normative practices in many school districts, even among the youngest of learners. There are some possibilities as to why this is happening, that we have our implicit biases that contribute to this problem, possibility that cultural misunderstandings, racial discrimination, and so many other small factors and big factors play a part to this. We really have to think about and check ourselves and to understand the cultures that are in our classroom. And the way we can do that is by learning from the experts, which again, are our families, our communities. Cultural capital and young learners. I want you to reflect on page 33. Given the increasing racial and cultural diversity in our nation's schools and in early childhood programs in particular, what role should cultural relevance have in teaching practices and policies? What are the essential knowledge and skills that early childhood educators need for teaching today's diverse learners, and how are learning prospects compromised for diverse learners when educators do not understand them culturally. Understanding the cultural capital of young learners moves practitioners away from believing that there are deficits and pathologies among communities, children, and family of color, and towards seeing children's behaviors through a cultural asset lens. It's a fundamental approach to understanding the cultural capital of young learners is to recognize that different ways of doing, knowing, communicating, learning, and living do not mean a deficit. This is really important. Over history, over time, it has seemed to evolve even more so that if a child is not of the like raising of educators, if it is not something that they are familiar with, it is not something that they were brought up as, then that must be a deficit. And we need to get away from that, because every child that walks into our classroom, they are an asset. They are somebody that enriches our lives. And they have so much to offer, and we have so much to learn from them. But yet there seems to be a shift that is a deficit if it's not like what I am used to. And we need to get away from that. Erickson and Bronsven-Bermer have really two great ways of thinking of it. They have where they look at the local communities as a cultural practice, and understanding that cultural practice is so important in your classroom. Every community has its own way of doing things, and it's important that you understand that. Although it's not necessary to live in the same community that you practice at or where you teach at, but it is important for you to understand that community, and that community, that influence on that child, how that impacts them coming into your classroom. You also want to know about the ecological systems theory. And in this theory, it talks about how there are different rings, and the child is at the center of the ring, and then it has another ring, and it goes further out. Each ring is bigger, bigger, bigger. And the smaller rings closer to the child are the ones that are more of a direct impact. So community, family, friends, that kind of thing is a direct impact. And then it works itself all the way out to laws and legislation and rules and guidances and government practices, where it does have an impact on a child, but not a direct impact. And those two systems, those two trains of thoughts or practices really will allow you, if you dig into them, to understand that there's so much, and it's so complicated, the things that impact the children in our communities, and what then the children are bringing into your classrooms. The importance of culture in the learning process cannot be overstated. For example, much of the curriculum, instructional approaches, and assessment mechanisms in the U.S. school are steeped in mainstream ideology, language, norms, and examples, while non-white ways of knowing and being are often excluded. For example, many Black students' participation can be very spontaneous and demonstrative. Kinship bonds are highly valued, and connecting academic content to prior cultural knowledge is essential. This is not to suggest that these factors are not also critical for white students. Yet, in many preschool learning settings, the expectations for how to perform or behave in school lack cultural nuances that many non-white students depend on for participation and engagement in learning. Eurocentric approaches in schools, even for young learners, prioritize certain ways of talking, learning, sharing, and participating that may be foreign to many children of color. Moreover, books and activities that rarely reflect the experiences, stories, and sayings, parables, backgrounds, and histories of children of color can also lead to disengagement and refusal to participate in learning. It is vital for early childhood educators to develop a firm grasp of how students' cultural capital influences the way students think, speak, process, and make learning of school situations and circumstances. Cultural relevance approaches it's something that empowers students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically. There are 6 types of capital according to the Community Cultural Wealth Model. There's aspirational, linguistical, familial, social, navigational, resistant capital. So with each one of them, just to touch on them briefly, is aspirational, consists of ambitions, dreams, hopes, and that children and families of color possess, and their abilities to foster those desire even in the midst of adversity and hopelessness. So some things that I want you to consider is, how do teachers create space, time, and opportunities in their classrooms to engage and develop children to share, explore, and discuss their aspirations? What learning arrangements do you as a teacher offer children to share and nurture their aspirations as they develop literacy, numeracy, and social emotional skills? The second one in this model is linguistic capital, and it's comprised of a set of language and interaction skills that children possess as a result of their communication experiences. Again, things I want you to consider are how you are identifying, scaffolding, and supporting the development of all children's diverse language and communication variations, uniqueness, and strength. And how are you creating classroom spaces and pedagogical approaches that recognize, embrace, and build on the diverse linguistic orientations that all students bring to the classroom. The third part is the familiar capital, and that refers to the cultural and communal knowledge and ways of knowing and being that are nurtured among family and in family environments. This type of knowledge can include but not limited to, kinship ties, notions of care, love, affection that are unique to the family context. Things for you to consider are how you will build and sustain learning environments that allow children to share their family histories, stories, and values. How can you create a learning community that engages the presence and participation of children's families in the learning process of the classroom? The fourth one was social capital. That emphasizes children's networks, peers, and communities of adult caregivers that can assist with gaining access to information, navigating institutions, understanding unfamiliar situations, and providing opportunities that may not otherwise be available. For you to consider is, how will you move beyond deficit accounts of children and their families and help children recognize the gifts, talents, and strengths of their family and their social circles in ways that connect to their family histories, neighborhood assets, community bonds, and personal strengths? And how do you as an educator, how will you engage with children in the world of social media as learning to conduct that is age appropriate, is culturally responsive, and builds on other own ways of knowing? That's a pretty tricky one right now because we are in an age of social media. But what is acceptable and isn't acceptable? What is culturally appropriate for that as well? The fifth one was navigational capital. Refers to children's understanding of and ability to effectively interact in various social institutions, including schools. How are you going to help children's families navigate the layers of bureaucracy that often come with enrolling children in new schools or other educational programs? How do you help families and caregivers understand policies, procedures, jargon, and principles that are epidemic in our schools? And this is a very tricky one. This is why it is recommended that you have multiple languages, your forms in multiple languages, and that you have things that are broken down and easy for our families to be able to understand, because we do get into teacher jargon and acronyms. We're very heavy in acronyms. But families don't know that. So how are you going to make that so that families can navigate the system and make it as easy as possible for them, to come alongside with them, to fill out that paperwork, to have them see you as a person as a resource and not as somebody that is against you in this process? The last one was resistant capital. It refers to the ability to challenge inequity and disrupt unfair circumstances and situations. How are you going to support and understand children who are committed to standing up for peers or themselves who they believe are being treated unfairly? What learning opportunities can educators provide children to discuss the importance of speaking out against injustice and seeking fairness? In many early childhood classrooms, well-intended teachers across the racial and ethnic spectrum misinterpret students' way of being, exploring, learning, processing, communicating, and knowing as defiant, disruptive, and defensive-oriented. To appropriately recognize and intentionally respond to children's cultural practices, teachers must be open to children's different modes of expression and remain mindful of what those cultural practices might look like in school. As I said before, this is why we're taking and breaking apart this whole book, Equity and Diversity. It is so that you have a better understanding, so that we can stop looking at children as a deficit, but instead understanding when they do something, when they act a certain way, when they say a certain way, when they need to learn a certain way, that we understand them and that we can enhance their learning experience. We know that certain cultures, it's more important to defend a friend than it is to learn something or to listen to the teacher at that moment. We know that all children, all people process things differently, but yet we seem to expect that all children should be learning the same way. That is why in early childhood, we need play-based programs so that a child has their way to guide their own learning, their own process. And that as we see confrontations between children, we really need to think before we react to things. And again, look at your biases. What are your hot spots? But that we can understand children and stop looking at them, again, as I mentioned, as a deficit. I want you to make sure you read and reflect on the 3 snapshots of how cultural capital may manifest itself and then respond to the forum. You are to read, "You are your brother's keeper." You are to read directives disguised as questions. And I want you to make sure you are reading Resisting for a Reason. I believe that each one of these scenarios will give you a little bit better understanding of what I was referring to in the previous slide when I had mentioned that we misinterpret students' ways of being, exploring, learning, and so on. Those 3 will give you a greater foundation and understanding as you're working with children in your classroom. I also need for you to read Building Teachers' Cultural Capital, because it talks about 4 essential questions that you need to be thinking about. Like, how do race, class, and gender intersect to create an oppressive conditions in society? How do schools serve to reproduce social inequality? And how can teachers and students resist oppression? These are things that you should always be thinking about. And in previous chapter, we talked about entry points. And this could be another one of those entry points for you to start doing your research behind. Again, thinking about the children you work with. It also, a good starting point would be what Loris Malgussi, the founder of Reggio Emilia approach, referred to as the image of the child. I want you to think about your image of the child. What do you think that is? He stated that the teacher's image of a child is where teaching begins. Therefore, believing in the power of the child as capable, competent, resourceful learner as the first dimension of the cultural capital that the early childhood professional should bring to teaching and learning process. I think that is completely well stated and our mission for not only this course, but you as an educator. So, wrapping everything all up, we know that culture will continue to matter for all learners and that we need to not only embrace it, that's not just enough, but we need to do more with it. We need to understand, and we need to stop looking at children as a deficit. We need, especially children of color. We need to and want to make sure that they are being heard, seen, represented. Frequently misunderstood or ignored children, where children of color, we need to make sure that they're not misunderstood, that we understand them, and that we understand their cultural practices. All children come to school with cultural rooted knowledge. No matter what, we have it, they have it. It's time to embrace it and make sure that we bring that into the classroom. It's important for educators not to place the onus for cultural adaptation solely on young learners, but on themselves as well. We have to do the work as educators. We can't just leave it up to the children. We have to do it ourselves, and we need to make sure we're growing as much as we would love to see them grow. Expectations for teachers as trained professionals to take the larger share of responsibility and adapt their understanding to young learners. As I just stated, it really falls on us. We need to make sure we are the leaders in this, to make sure that we are making sure all children are heard, all voices are represented in our classroom, and that we are capitalizing on the culture and engaging young learners in these diverse classrooms. And it's not only professionally appropriate, but in many ways it is ethnically just. And so then I will leave you with the statement that I started us out with. When each child's cultural capital is understood, learning can be enhanced by instruction that honors these cultural practices and respectfully teaches new practices rooted in other cultures. I'll leave you for now with that to reflect and to think on, where are you at in this journey? How are you going to take this information and change your educational practices or your way of being, not only as a human, but somebody that is responsible for fostering growth and development in children?